Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca, there are 22 monuments to the power of the gospel. They are 22 churches of the Evangelical Covenant denomination. Planted and nurtured by Mexican nationals, they are very much different from most covenant churches in the United States. They bear the distinctive cultural stamp of the people who make up their congregations. For a half-century, the covenant churches have been growing in Oaxaca, a rural state of beautiful valleys and rugged mountains 325 miles south of Mexico City. Many are in towns whose names reflect the Mixe and Zapotec Indian backgrounds of their people. Mitla, Tlacalula, Yaganisa, La Shropa, La Chigalo, Zachila, Haliesa. The churches began here in the early 1940s, largely because of the salvation of one man, Agapito Villafañe. Villafañe left his home in Oaxaca to work as a bracero farm worker in South Texas. There he accepted Christ after hearing the gospel from covenant missionaries. He returned home and began preaching to his neighbors. Agapito's sons-in-law traveled with him to spread the gospel. One of them, Isidro Gonzalez, is now a pastor. Often they travel to remote locations in the Sierra Alta Mountains, walking for days.
There were no buses or public transportation to get to the villages or to get back up into the hills. So everything was really done on foot. Just walk from town to town, up and down the mountains until we got there.
Another son-in-law, Julian Quero, is now Southern Regional Director for the Covenant Churches in Mexico. He says the growth has been slow but steady.
If we added some of the newer churches, the numbers have now increased. It's probably around 1,000 people altogether.
Because their message often conflicted with the way people have lived for centuries, the pastors have faced persecution. Julian Quero has been thrown in jail. Churches have been torn down. Some church leaders have been threatened. Some have been killed. Isidro Gonzalez has been forced to leave more than one town, but he says persecution doesn't stop the gospel.
What has happened in these cases is that people feel they can stop the growth of the gospel in their town by striking at the leaders, putting the leaders in jail, perhaps threatening him in some way. But it's had actually the opposite effect, because then the people are drawn together more in their support.
Church leaders are encouraged most by the changes they see in people's lives. Angelina Villafañe is Julian Quero's wife. Agapito Villafañe is her father. She says she is particularly pleased that when men accept Christ, life is better for women.
Yo creo que no, porque como digo, la mujer aquí, una mujer que no es cristiana.
Most of the women are beaten by their husbands in these towns. It's just a standard custom. And so when a couple changes, of course due to the gospel, and he doesn't do that anymore, then it's wonderful for the woman. She really likes that, and it's a better life for her in many ways.
Although the Oaxacan churches were started by Mexicans and nurtured by Mexicans, they have strong ties to covenant churches in the United States through missionaries such as David Mark. Over the years, covenant missionaries, supported by churches in the U.S., have worked alongside church leaders here. They have provided theological guidance and limited financial support. And they have coordinated work groups from the U.S., work groups that have carried out construction projects as well as medical clinics.
El hecho de que subsista la obra The fact of our existence is really due to a lot of that support. In the past, the pastors were subsidized and paid by the covenant in the United States, and we had groups that came from quite a ways back.
Periodically, the church leaders gather at the covenant campsite outside Oaxaca. When they do, they share what God is doing in their churches. They sing and fellowship together, and they talk about what they'd like to see happen.
What
I'd really like to see, of course, is, as the Bible instructs, is continued growth and outreach. But I think what I'd also really like to see is each church having its own nucleus of leaders that are working together.
Julian Quero talks of training for the church leaders, most of whom have come from among the congregation.
And they need a lot of support and a lot of help in theological education and training to be able to proceed.
And as they look to the future, the churches of Oaxaca continue to worship God, to preach the gospel, and to love one another.